Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into the fascinating mechanics of how we actually acquire and use a second language in the real world. We are unpacking some incredibly rich source material today, taking complex linguistic theories and translating them into clear, actionable insights you can actually use. So, to kick things off, I want you to picture a very specific and probably very relatable scenario. Think back to a time when you were speaking a foreign language and right in the middle of a sentence you just blank. You suddenly forget a crucial word. You feel that mild, awkward panic creeping in, right? You're stuck. Your brain totally scrambles for a lifeline. Well, what if I told you that how you handle that exact moment of panic is actually a measurable, teachable skill? It is, and today we're introducing what linguists call strategic competence. It is literally the ultimate solution to that mid-sentence brain freeze.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll start with decoding communicative competence, move into the power of strategic competence, look at communication strategies in action, discuss why we teach strategies, and finally, look at some proof from the classroom.
Okay, part 1. Decoding communicative competence. Let's lay down the foundational concepts of modern language teaching.
To really get this, we have to look at a massive historical shift in how experts even think about language learning. For the longest time, the heavy focus was on Noam Chomsky's idea of linguistic competence. Chomsky was really focused on this idea of the ideal speaker-listener and very strict rules of grammar. Essentially, his question was, do you know the underlying perfect mathematical system of the language? But then, applied linguists like Del Hymes came along and essentially said, wait a minute. Hymes realized that a person could have absolutely flawless grammar, but still fail completely at actually communicating with another human being. So he proposed communicative competence, which totally shifted the focus to actual social interaction. Because really, it's not just about knowing the textbook rules, it's about knowing how to actually use them in the messy, real world.
Building on that, researchers like Canali and Swain broke communicative competence down into 4 distinct pillars. First, you've got grammatical competence, so knowing your verbs and vocabulary. Then, sociolinguistic competence, knowing what's socially appropriate to say depending on who you're talking to. Third is discourse competence, your ability to connect sentences together logically to tell a story or make a speech. And finally, living right there in this broader ecosystem is our star player for today, strategic competence.
Moving into part 2, the power of strategic competence. Now that we know where it lives, let's zoom in on what makes this specific skill so incredibly powerful.
The absolutely crucial point to understand here is that strategic competence acts as your mental bridge. When you're talking and you suddenly lack the right vocabulary or the grammar to express a thought, this competence kicks in. It's your ability to use verbal strategies, like trying to describe the word you can't remember, or nonverbal strategies, like wildly miming or gesturing, to bridge that gap and just keep the conversation alive. And look, if you ever feel bad or embarrassed about relying on these workarounds, please don't. There's this fantastic quote from researcher Fawcett reminding us that even native speakers rely on these strategies every single day. I mean, think about it. Have you ever been speaking your native language and said, hey, hand me that, that thingamajig that you use to open boxes, right? That is strategic competence. It proves that language control is never truly flawless for literally anyone. What's really cool is seeing how academic thought on this has evolved. Back at 1980, the Canali and Swain model viewed this competence mostly as a defensive compensatory function. It was basically just a backup repair tool for when communication crashed and burned. But roll the clock forward a decade, and the Bachman model expanded this dramatically. Bachman said, actually, strategic competence isn't just a backup plan, it is a highly active, broader cognitive capacity. It involves constantly assessing the situation, planning your language use, and executing it. It's basically the executive control center for all of your communication. Section 3. Communication strategies in action. Let's get out of the abstract theories for a second and see exactly what these communication strategies, often just called CSs, look like out in the wild. There's this hilarious, very real-world anecdote from the source text. An author was discussing historical legal punishments with someone, but they were really struggling to find the exact English verb to describe the action of throwing stones. The other person, the interlocutor, jumps in to help and asks, you mean they stone him? And the author immediately adopts it, replying, yeah, he is stoned. Now, obviously that has a slightly different modern meaning, but the author inadvertently learned the verb stoned right there on the spot through what we call a negotiation strategy. It absolutely proves that pushing through a moment of awkward confusion directly leads to acquiring new language. I absolutely love breaking down this rapid-fire toolkit. When you're deep in the trenches of a conversation, you actually have a ton of these strategies at your disposal. You can use a direct appeal for help, which is literally just pausing and asking, what do you call it, or how do you say? Or you might rely on guessing, where you just throw out a related word with a really questioning tone, like, is it a sink? These are the exact phrases learners use to ask for clarification, get confirmation, or simply beg their conversational partner for a little bit of help.
Okay, this one is probably my absolute favorite strategy. It's called word coinage. This example comes from data collected at your MOOC University. A learner was trying to tell a story based on a picture, but they didn't know the specific word for a broken bicycle. So what did they do? They creatively invented a highly logical yet completely non-existent English word. They described the bicycle as being unmove. It's so brilliant. I mean, it perfectly communicates the exact meaning, even if it's nowhere to be found in a dictionary.
Section 4. Why we teach strategies. Now that we've seen them in action, let's explore why actively teaching these strategies is an absolute game changer in language classrooms.
The big takeaway here is a total shift in perspective. Historically, using a workaround like unmove might have been graded as a failure or a lack of knowledge, but modern research strongly supports teaching these strategies explicitly. Why? Because using strategies isn't a sign of failure at all. It actively keeps learners in the conversation, which means they get way more exposure and practice. It trains their mental flexibility to cope with unexpected twists in a chat, and crucially, it encourages risk-taking. It keeps students engaged in the messy, unpredictable nature of real human communication, rather than just freezing up in fear of making a mistake. To actually put this into practice, instructors can proactively embed what's known as procedural vocabulary right into their teaching. Instead of just drilling massive lists of random nouns and verbs, we can hand students the exact conversational life preservers they need when they inevitably hit a roadblock. Teaching them simple structures like it's a kind of or it's used for gives them an immediate framework to describe almost anything in the world, even if they have absolutely no idea what the specific name for it is.
Finally, Section 5. Proof from the classroom. To wrap this all together, let's look at some hard empirical validation that proves teaching strategic competence actually yields tangible, real-world results.
Our source text highlights this fascinating pilot study conducted at the Etisalat Academy over in Dubai. Researchers took 22 female college graduates who were entering a corporate training program, and they gave them just one day of intensive communication strategy training. They were taught explicitly how to use circumlocution, description, and approximation. The goal was simply to see if this quick training could help them successfully describe complex objects when they deliberately didn't know the right vocabulary.
The results? Completely amazing. Before the training, many of these students couldn't name the objects and would just totally abandon the message. But post-training, the transformation was undeniable. Even the weakest subjects were suddenly using their newly learned strategies. To describe a triangle, one student confidently navigated the gap by saying, "It is something we draw and, it has 3 sides." For an eagle, another student produced a kind of a bird, dangerous, fly in the sky, strong eyes. It's incredible. They successfully transmitted comprehensible meaning to the listener without knowing the exact target vocabulary. That is strategic competence at work.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to consider for your own language learning journey, or frankly, just your everyday interactions. We spend so much of our time stressing out about absolute perfection, but knowing that flawless grammar is definitely not the only path to being understood, how will you embrace a little bit of creative risk-taking? Because sometimes getting your point across isn't about knowing all the right words, it's simply about having the right strategy. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.